The galaxy didn't fear humans. That was the problem. For 300 years, the Karth Dominion ruled known space. They weren't the strongest or the smartest. They were just ruthless early, and no one ever had the will to stop them. When humanity finally stumbled onto the galactic stage, loud, divided, and wonderfully emotional, the Dominion laughed. Here was a species arguing with itself on open channels, broadcasting entertainment, memes, and political chaos into the void. They had no unified empire, no ancient war fleets, no terrifying reputation. The Karth classified Earth as Category Green, non-threatening, exploitable. It was their first mistake. The first Karth fleet arrived above Mars without any warning. There was no declaration of war, no attempt at diplomacy, just cold, efficient orbital fire. Human ships rushed to intercept. Civilian freighters with retrofitted armor, mining vessels armed with railguns meant for asteroids. They fought with incredible bravery, and they died with incredible speed. The Karth commander recorded the battle, intending to use it as a lesson for the Academy. "Observe," his voice calmly narrated, "how an emotional species breaks under pressure. On Earth, the world watched the feed, and humanity learned something far more important. The Dominion didn't target military bases first. They targeted cities, Tokyo, Los Angeles, Karachi, São Paulo. These were precision strikes designed to terrify, not to exterminate. The Karth wanted obedience, not ashes. They wanted Earth's industries intact, and its people alive just enough to work. Then, the Dominion sent their terms. Submit. Disarm. Serve. You will be preserved." World leaders argued for 12 agonizing hours. Humanity as a whole argued for about 12 seconds. Then, the global networks went quiet. Not the panicked chaos the Karth expected. Just quiet. A deep, unsettling silence. Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, under the ancient ice of Antarctica, and in oceanic vaults older than spaceflight itself, humanity's real systems began to wake up. These were the projects never acknowledged publicly, the programs hidden even from most presidents, the technologies dismissed in public forums as purely theoretical. Because humans, you see, don't show their sharpest teeth until they've been bitten. Admiral Evelyn Carter stared at the tactical hologram, her face a mask of stone. "We've lost orbital control," an officer reported, his voice tight. "They're positioning gravity lances over North America." Carter nodded once, her eyes never leaving the display. "Authorized Black Archive release." The room froze. A junior officer stammered, "Ma'am, that requires—" "I know what it requires," Carter cut him off, her voice calm but absolute. "Do it." A single, ominous red symbol bloomed on the main screen. Black Archive. Unsealed. Across the planet, systems older than the internet itself flickered to life. These weren't AI overlords or some undiscovered superweapon. It was something far worse. It was pure, unfiltered human ingenuity. The Karth expected a counterattack. They braced for missiles, for suicide runs, for desperate pleas. They did not expect silence. For 48 hours, Earth did nothing. No ships launched. No transmissions were sent. The Dominion commander allowed himself a smile. "They are broken," he declared to his bridge crew. Then his flagship's sensors began to scream. Space itself started to bend, not with the explosive force of a bomb, but with the precision of a scalpel. One by one, Karth ships lost their navigation. They weren't destroyed. They were just misplaced. A cruiser suddenly found itself materializing inside the crushing atmosphere of a gas giant. Another was spat out into the inescapable gravity well of a nearby star. A third simply vanished, as if it had never existed at all. "Impossible," the commander hissed, his composure finally cracking. "They don't have folding technology." He was correct. Humans didn't fold space. They cut it. Earth's response wasn't a roar of defiance. It was the whisper of an assassin. Karth supply depots across the entire sector began to fail at the exact same moment. They weren't attacked. Their armor simply began to corrode in the vacuum of space. Their reactors drifted out of phase by a fraction of a percent. Just enough to trigger a catastrophic failure, but not enough to be detected until it was too late. The Dominion's greatest advantage, their flawless logistics, collapsed in less than a week. Then came the message. It was broadcast on every known frequency in every Karth dialect. It was simple. It was calm. It was human. "You wanted labor. You wanted obedience. You wanted to show us what pain felt like. You should have finished the job. Now we're done being nice." The message sent a wave of panic through the Karth fleet. They escalated. They armed their planet-killer weapons, ready to turn Earth to glass. And that was when humanity finally stopped holding back. From hidden launch bays on the dark side of the moon, ships emerged that had never been seen before. They bore no markings. They gave off no heat signatures. They had no visible weapons. Humanity's doctrine of war wasn't about overwhelming firepower. It was about ending fights, permanently. The first human strike didn't hit a fleet. It didn't hit a command ship. It hit the Karth historical archives, their memory vaults, their genetic lineage banks, the very core of their cultural continuity. Everything that made them who they were. It was all gone in a matter of seconds. The Dominion screamed. For the first time in their long, brutal history, the Karth felt something entirely unfamiliar. They felt fear. Admiral Carter watched the chaotic feeds from her command center. "Status?" she asked. "Enemy command is completely fractured," an analyst replied, his voice filled with awe. "They're retreating, trying to regroup at their primary staging ground." Carter exhaled slowly, a long, steady breath. "Good," she said. "Let them run." Her second-in-command looked at her confused. "Ma'am?" She finally allowed a smile to touch her lips, but it held no kindness, no warmth. "We're not angry anymore," she said, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "We're focused." And somewhere, deep in the interstellar darkness, as the remnants of the Karth fleet fled in terror, humanity prepared Phase 2. Because hell wasn't unleashed. The Karth Dominion had never retreated before. They had withdrawn, sure, strategic repositioning, temporary pullbacks, but they had never fled in pure panic, abandoning entire sectors. Until now. Across the Orion Arm, Karth fleets scattered like startled insects. Their commanders screamed into their comms, desperate for clarity, for orders, for anything that resembled control. But no orders came. Because humanity didn't decapitate the Karth leadership. They disconnected it. The first sign that something was terribly wrong wasn't military. It was economic. Karth trade routes, some mapped and used for thousands of years, began failing all at once. They weren't destroyed. They were just wrong. Hyperlanes, the interstellar highways of the galaxy, shifted by mere nanometers. Gravity constants fluctuated by imperceptible amounts. Navigation beacons transmitted perfectly correct data that somehow led to completely incorrect destinations. Ships would make a jump and arrive light years off target. Others just vanished, never to arrive at all. Karth engineers tore through their equations in absolute terror. "These errors are impossible," they insisted to their superiors. "The universe doesn't behave this way." But humanity, it turned out, disagreed. Back on Earth, Admiral Evelyn Carter stood before a chamber that hadn't been used since the Cold War. It was filled with rows of analysts, civilian scientists, military officers, economists, psychologists, the best minds humanity had to offer. "This isn't a war of ships," Carter said, her voice calm and steady. "It's a war of systems." A hand went up in the silent room. "Ma'am, if we continue to Phase 2, their entire civilization collapses within months." Carter simply nodded. "I know." The silence in the room grew heavy. Then a hushed whisper from the back. "That's genocide?" Carter didn't flinch. "No," she replied, her eyes sweeping across the room. "This is what happens when predators meet engineers." The Karth, now desperate, attempted diplomacy. A message came through back channels, encrypted and frantic. "Humanity, cease hostilities. We will negotiate terms of coexistence." The message was forwarded to Earth's response committee. They debated for exactly 6 minutes. The reply they sent back was brutally short. "You taught us that mercy is weakness. We listened carefully." 72 hours later, the first true human strike happened. Not with bombs, with math. Karth star forges, the colossal structures that birthed their warships, relied on a delicate balance of stellar pressure, magnetic containment, and quantum timing. Human probes, unseen and unheard, altered just one variable. A single, tiny number in a galaxy-spanning equation. The star forges didn't explode. They aged. In a matter of seconds, they experienced the wear and tear of 10,000 years. Metal turned brittle. Containment fields collapsed with a soft sigh. Entire industrial cores died quietly. Overnight, Karth war production dropped by 83%. Panic spread like a virus. The Dominion's propaganda channels tried to maintain order, to project an image of strength, but humans had already infiltrated them. Not through hacking, but through translation. Every Karth broadcast now included subtle linguistic distortions. Phrases and words carefully chosen to trigger fear responses, historical trauma, and subconscious doubt. Their own language was turned against them, betraying them from within. Riots erupted on the Karth core worlds. Colonies, sensing weakness, declared their independence. Subject species, enslaved for centuries, watched the mighty Karth Empire bleed, and for the first time they smiled. Humanity hadn't needed to free them. Humanity had simply removed the chains. Finally, a Karth High Commander broke. In a fit of rage and desperation, he ordered the deployment of their planet-killer weapons. His logic was simple. If they couldn't rule the galaxy, they would burn it to the ground. But the weapons never fired. Humanity had anticipated this. Centuries ago. Earth's oldest military doctrine wasn't mutually assured destruction. It was mutually assured invalidation. Every single Karth doomsday system had received a silent override. It wasn't installed recently. It was hidden inside the very diplomatic and trade protocols the Dominion had forced upon a seemingly weak Earth during their first contact. Human engineers had a nickname for it: polite compliance. The planet killers powered down. The High Commander was arrested by his own guards within the hour, his authority shattered. For the first time in galactic history, the galaxy saw the Karth kneel. A formal surrender request was transmitted. Live. Unfiltered. The Karth delegation appeared on every screen, towering, armored beings, now trembling. "We acknowledge defeat," their speaker said, his voice cracking. "We ask for survival." Humanity watched. There was no cheering, no celebration, only cold calculation. Admiral Carter leaned forward, her face projected across the galaxy. "You'll survive," she said, "but not as you were." The terms were simple and non-negotiable. No empire, no dominion, no fleets beyond what was needed for local defense. Every subject species was to be freed. Every historical lie they had built their empire on was to be exposed. Every war crime archived and remembered. "You wanted us to remain small," Carter concluded, her voice echoing in the silence. "We're very good at being underestimated." The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, countless civilizations, old and new, took notes, because humanity hadn't just conquered an enemy. They had rewritten the fundamental rules of power. And somewhere, in the deepest voids of space, beyond the known maps, ancient observers who had slept through the rise and fall of countless empires finally opened their eyes. Not because of the Karth's fall, but because of Earth's rise. And they whispered a single terrified question. If this is what humans do when they are pushed into a corner, what will they do when they choose to expand? Long before humanity ever learned to light a fire, the galaxy already had its rules. These weren't laws written on stone or stored in databanks. They were rules written in silence. When a species grew too aggressive, the silence watched. When an empire burned entire worlds, the silence waited. And when the delicate balance of the cosmos tipped too far, the silence simply erased the problem. The once mighty Karth Dominion had survived for eons, ruling vast stretches of space only because they were wise enough never to cross that invisible line. Humanity, however, was not so wise. We didn't just cross the line, we sprinted past it, and in doing so, we woke the silence up. They arrived without ships. There was no shimmering hyperspace wake, no sudden energy spike, no warning at all. Across 12 star systems, the light of suns simply dimmed, bending inward as if reality itself was leaning closer to listen. On every bridge, on every colony, every sensor screamed the same impossible reading. Mass, undefined. Origin, undefined. Intent, observation. The ancients had arrived. On Earth, alarms blared across continents, then abruptly stopped. Not disabled. They were calmed. Admiral Evelyn Carter stood alone in the global command chamber, the air around her shimmering like heat off summer asphalt. A shape began to form. It wasn't physical, not exactly. It wasn't pure energy either. It was more like an idea wearing a shadow. A voice spoke, not through the air, but directly into her mind, a thought that felt older than stone. "Young species, you have disrupted the equilibrium." Carter didn't reach for her sidearm. She didn't panic. Instead, she calmly folded her hands behind her back. "Good," she replied, her voice steady in the silent room. "That means it was fragile." The present seemed to pause, and for beings who had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies, the ancients did not pause often. The voice returned, laced with an ancient authority. The Karth were permitted to rule. They maintained acceptable levels of destruction. Carter's lips curved into a faint, defiant smile. Acceptable to who? To existence. "Existence doesn't get a vote," Carter shot back. "People do." The very foundations of the chamber trembled, not with anger, but with a feeling that was utterly alien to these beings. Confusion. Across the galaxy, the ancients spoke simultaneously to every spacefaring civilization, from the insectoid cliques to the crystalline shapers. Their message was a cold, cosmic judgment. Humanity is an anomaly. They escalate without restraint. They dismantle systems instead of submitting to them. This behavior is unsustainable. Panic spread like a shockwave. Species that had watched humanity's recent wars with a mixture of awe and fear now watched with pure terror. Because this wasn't an empire being warned. This was a species being judged, and the sentence was always erasure. The ancients turned their attention back to Earth, their collective will focusing on Admiral Carter. Withdraw, disarm, accept supervision. The words carried a weight that had collapsed stars and forgotten ages. They were a command, not a request. But humanity's response came from an unexpected source, not from politicians in protected bunkers, not from generals on warships. It came from a civilian signal, broadcast openly, defiantly into the void. A teacher in Ohio, a mechanic in Texas, a nurse in California, a farmer in Kansas. Millions of individual voices from every corner of the planet rising as one message, one word. No. The ancients felt something they had never encountered before. Resistance without hostility. A quiet, unshakable resolve. Back in the command chamber, Carter's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "You don't scare us," she said. "You disappoint us." The presence rippled. "We have ended civilizations for less." "And yet," Carter replied, a flicker of triumph in her eyes, "you're talking." A silence stretched between them, a silence that felt heavier than a dying star. Then the ancient asked the unthinkable question, a question born of pure bewilderment. "Why? Why do you fight so fiercely? You gain nothing from this defiance." Carter's expression softened. The general was gone, replaced by something more fundamental. "We gain each other," she said. "You've been measuring survival all wrong." Humanity didn't threaten. We didn't posture or bargain. We explained. We broadcast our history, our art, our moments of deepest failure and greatest triumph. We showed them recordings of parents shielding their children from harm, of strangers running into burning buildings to save people they'd never met, of soldiers holding lines they knew would break, just to buy a few more seconds for the person next to them. It wasn't about conquest. It was about connection. The ancients observed, and for the first time since before the stars had names, they recalculated. Their entire understanding of life was being challenged. "You are inefficient," the ancient admitted, the confusion still echoing in its mental voice. "You suffer needlessly." Carter nodded slowly. "Yes, we do, but we choose it." "Why?" "Because if survival costs us our humanity," she answered, her voice ringing with absolute certainty, "then what survives isn't worth saving." The shadowy presence in the room faded slightly, not retreating, but thinking. Across the unfathomable depths of their archives, the ancients saw what they had missed. Humanity didn't dominate systems. We adapted inside chaos. We didn't fear collapse. We grew from it. That was the true anomaly. We were a species defined not by our power, but by our resilience in the face of our own fragility. "We will not erase you," the ancient finally said, the decision echoing across the cosmos. "But you cannot remain unchecked." Carter gave a single, firm nod. "Fair. You will become a variable in the equation of existence." A true smile finally broke across Carter's face. "We already are." Instantly the stars brightened. The crushing pressure on reality lifted. The ancients withdrew, not defeated and not victorious. They were concerned. Across the galaxy, countless civilizations let out a collective sigh of relief. But on Earth, in rooms buried even deeper than the global command chamber, humanity was already updating its strategic models. Because now we knew something vital, something game-changing. The universe wasn't just hostile or indifferent. It was afraid and fear. The ancients didn't attack. That was how humanity knew things had become truly dangerous. Across all of known space, new constants suddenly appeared. They weren't new laws of physics. They were limits. Hyperlane ranges shortened overnight. Energy thresholds were capped at surprisingly low levels. Certain fundamental equations, they simply stopped working. Panic erupted across civilizations. Technologies that had been reliable for centuries failed without warning. Starships stalled between systems. Reactors went cold, and entire planetary grids flickered and died. But amidst the chaos, humanity noticed something else. Something strange. These new limits were selective. Weapon systems degraded far faster than defensive shields. Technologies for expansion and conquest slowed to a crawl, but life support and survival systems stabilized, becoming more efficient than ever. War suddenly became astronomically expensive. Peace, on the other hand, became the most logical, efficient path forward. The ancients hadn't declared war on the universe. They had rewritten its very environment. On Earth, deep within the planet's core, the Black Archive, humanity's ultimate repository of forbidden knowledge and existential threats, updated itself. A single message flashed across its dark screens. Status: containment phase detected. Origin: extra-universal observers. Recommended response: adaptation. Admiral Carter stared at the report, the words glowing in the dim command center. "They're turning the universe into a cage," someone whispered behind her, their voice trembling with a mix of awe and terror. Carter slowly shook her head. "No," she said, her voice steady and clear. "They're not building a cage. They're building a classroom." And then the ancients spoke again. But not with words or ships. They seeded ideas. Like cosmic pollen on the solar winds, concepts drifted into the minds of countless species across the galaxy. Entire civilizations, separated by thousands of light years, began proposing identical treaties, identical ethical frameworks, identical social limits, all independently, all at the same time. Cultural convergence was happening at a speed that defied nature. Humanity recognized the pattern instantly. It was soft control, narrative pressure, moral gravity. These were old tricks, the very same ones humans had used on each other for millennia to shape societies and guide history. The great mistake the ancients made was assuming humanity would resist the cage, that we would rattle the bars and fight back. We didn't. We studied it. Within months, the entire direction of human science pivoted. We didn't try to build bigger weapons to break the new rules. We embraced them. We began the study of constraint engineering. If energy was limited, we learned to optimize information. If space-time itself resisted being folded, we learned to flow through its currents like a river. If the constants of the universe had hardened, we stopped looking for the center and started searching for the edges, the seams, the places where rules meet and where loopholes are born. It was a young physicist in Mumbai who first noticed something small, almost insignificant. The new universal limits were applied globally, affecting everything, everywhere, all at once. But the act of observation itself, it still behaved locally. Information, she realized, traveled differently than matter. She called her discovery asymmetric causality. The Black Archive gave it a different name, permission slip 0. The first test was harmless. A tiny probe on the edge of the solar system transmitted a signal that, according to the new physics, should never have arrived. But it did. Then another probe sent another signal. And then a whole network came online, whispering to each other across impossible distances. The ancients noticed. Not with blaring alarms or fleets of warships. They noticed with curiosity. A silent, disembodied thought echoed through the network. You adapt quickly. Humanity's reply was simple, a collective thought sent back into the void. We practice? The ancients responded by imposing one final absolute restriction. No species could expand beyond predefined stellar boundaries. Borders were literally written into the fabric of space-time. They were permanent, unbreakable, the ultimate containment. So humanity did the only logical thing. We stopped expanding entirely. We turned inward, and we began to grow faster than ever before. Without new territory to conquer, we optimized our minds. We developed distributed cognition, linking billions of minds into a single, cohesive consciousness. We created collective simulations, allowing our civilization to run millions of possible futures every single second, testing every outcome, learning from every mistake before it was ever made. Humanity stopped asking, what can we build? And started asking a much more profound question. What can we become without breaking the rules? And that question frightened the ancients more than any weapon ever had. For the first time in eons, the creators of the classroom convened. They are not rebelling, one observed. They are integrating. Another sent a wave of warning. They are learning the structure beneath the control. If they understand it fully, the thought was left unfinished, too terrifying to complete. Then, humanity did something no one expected. We sent an invitation, not a threat, not a demand for freedom, but an offer, a simple message addressed to the gods who had caged us. We don't want your place, it said. We want to understand why you're so afraid of losing it. The ancients hesitated. Gods rarely admit to fear, but they responded. Because when a younger species begins to surpass the very concept of balance, existence itself can fracture. Humanity's answer was gentle yet firm. Balance that cannot change isn't balance. It's stagnation. For the first time, the ancients considered the impossible. That maybe, just maybe, they weren't the guardians of reality. They were merely its first survivors. And humanity? Humanity was the next step in its evolution. Across the cosmos, the limits held. The rules remained intact. But something subtle had shifted. The universe no longer felt like it was pushing back against humanity. It felt like it was leaning in, listening. Back on Earth, Admiral Carter closed the final report from the Black Archive. The crisis was over. The great game had changed. Someone in the room finally asked the dangerous question that had been on everyone's mind. If they're not our enemies, Admiral, then what are they? Carter smiled, a knowing ancient look in her eyes. Our predecessors. And somewhere, in a place beyond time and space, the ancients wondered, if humanity one day reaches our level, who will be there to stop them? The answer echoed in the silence of infinity, and it scared them. Because for the first time, they weren't sure anyone should. For eons, the universe has had its own immune system. When stars became unstable, they collapsed. When species turned too violent, they burned themselves out. When empires grew too large, entropy would patiently clean up the mess. Overseeing it all were the ancients. They weren't rulers, not in the way we think of them. They were janitors, cosmic custodians, and for longer than our minds can comprehend, their quiet work was enough. Until humanity. The revelation wasn't a grand, terrifying attack. It was a subtle, creeping failure. Across all of existence, something began to fray. Causality started to lag. A glass would fall, and for a split second, the sound of it shattering would wait, as if hesitating. Effects were arriving late to their own causes. Reality itself was stuttering, like a film reel skipping frames. The ancients saw it first, a slow-motion catastrophe they had spent eternity preventing. Then, to their utter horror, they realized humanity saw it too, and we were understanding it faster than they were. Deep within their most sacred archive, a place holding the accumulated knowledge of ages, their simulations all collapsed into a single, chilling conclusion. It wasn't that the universe was running out of energy, or space, or even time. It was running out of options. Adaptability. Reality, it turned out, had finite limits to its flexibility, and we were pushing against them. For the first time, the ancients spoke to us as equals, not from a pedestal of cosmic superiority, but from beside us, sharing a common dread. We stabilized existence long ago, they admitted, their voices echoing across galaxies. We froze it to prevent this very collapse. Humanity listened, not with the fear they expected, but with a quiet, profound understanding. Admiral Carter, standing on the bridge of humanity's flagship, spoke for us all. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of our species. "You stopped evolution," she said, "because you were afraid of what came next." The ancient's reply was laced with a weariness older than stars. "We survived the fracture. You have not seen what we have seen." Carter just nodded, her gaze firm. "Then show us." And they did. The ancients opened their memories, visions older than the first stars, of a previous universe, a cosmos that had burned itself out through unchecked, chaotic growth. Too much power, too many contradictions, too much change, all at once. It was a symphony of chaos that ended in absolute silence as reality tore itself apart. The ancients were the sole survivors, escaping only by becoming static, unchanging, permanent. They became the guardians of a frozen, predictable balance. They sacrificed dynamism for survival. Humanity absorbed this terrifying truth. We saw the inferno they had fled from, and then we asked the one question no one, not even the ancients, had ever dared to ask. So why didn't this universe collapse already? A silence fell. A silence filled with an answer the ancients already knew but couldn't bring themselves to say. Humanity wasn't stable. We weren't efficient. We were anything but balanced. But we were resilient. Where reality bent, we learned to adapt. Where cosmic systems failed, we jury-rigged and rebuilt. Where the very meaning of existence fractured, we invented new ones. We weren't fighting entropy. We were dancing with it, partnering with it. The universe wasn't dying. It was changing, transitioning, and it was a journey the static ancients could not follow. The final choice emerged from the silence. It wasn't an order or a demand. It was an offer. One species, the ancients proposed, must anchor the next phase of existence, not by controlling it, but by participating in it. Humanity understood instantly. To become that anchor was the ultimate sacrifice. There would be no throne, no godhood, no escape from the consequences. It meant tying our fate directly to the universe itself. If reality suffered, we would suffer with it. If it healed, we would forever carry the scars of its wounds. The vote was global. It wasn't left to governments or leaders. It was put to every single person. The result wasn't unanimous, but it was overwhelming. Humanity said yes, not because we craved power, but because the thought of letting existence face the unknown future alone was simply unbearable. The transition began. The ancients started to fade. They weren't dying or being erased. They were being released. For the first time since before time began, they could finally rest. The universe shifted. The fundamental constants of physics, once frozen solid, began to loosen. They didn't disappear, but they became alive again. Change returned. Growth resumed. Risk, and with it hope, became possible once more. Humanity didn't become gods. We became something infinitely harder. We became caretakers who could feel loss, architects who could fail, guardians who could change their minds. The universe took a deep breath, its first in an eternity. Far into the future, new species would evolve among the vibrant, changing stars. They would discover ancient records, digital ghosts, telling stories of their creators. They'd read tales of monsters called humans, of wars that rewrote the laws of physics, of gods who willingly stepped aside. And they would ask the same question the ancients once did. Why were humans chosen? The answer would be etched into the fabric of reality itself. Because when given ultimate power, humanity chose responsibility. Back on Earth, long after Admiral Carter and her generation were gone, children still looked up at the night sky. But they didn't look with fear or with worship. They looked with a quiet familiarity, like gazing at the face of an old, trusted friend. And the universe? The universe finally stopped correcting itself. Because it had learned something profound from us. Perfection is brittle. But imperfect things, they endure. Thank you for watching. If this story sparked something in you, consider subscribing for more journeys into what could be. Stay curious.